Hey everybody, welcome to our first bonus episode of The Inflection Cut. As we mentioned in the main feed for our second episode, which is on Darren Aronofsky's Batman Year One, Eric and I ended up going on a deep dive looking at what casting could have been like for that film. We decided to pull it from the main episode because it was running very long, but we had a lot of fun. We discussed a lot of things in not only Batman Year One itself, but also talked a little bit more about Batman Beyond, and a couple of the other inflected DC movies that we might have seen. And with that, I'm going to roll you directly into our discussion, which starts right after we finish discussing what the deal would have looked like to make Aronofsky's Batman Year One happen. Enjoy.
All right, so let's assume that's a go.
Mm-hmm. So now we got to cast.
Now we got to cast
guy.
it. Okay,
Yeah.
So let's start with Bruce. When Aronofsky was originally working on this, his vision was Joaquin Phoenix.
He really wanted to get Joaquin Phoenix as Bruce. And, I can see it. I can definitely see Joaquin really kind of like pushing not so much the Charles Bronson side of Bruce Wayne as the Travis Bickle side.
Right.
There'd be a lot going on in the eyes there.
Now, the studio wanted Freddie Prinze Jr.
And I think that should be the end of that discussion with us. I don't believe that that's a hill the studio would have died on. I also cannot imagine Freddie Prinze Jr. delivering the performance that they want.
Yeah, I just don't see it.
I agree. And I think there's some other people that are likely in the mix at this point. First of all, a great screenwriting pair from Boston, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. Now, Ben Affleck, of course, eventually does get to take the role of Batman, but we're now talking about like early 2000s Ben Affleck, which is a very, very different animal. If you want, you can see Daredevil for evidence of that.
So for this period, if I were to choose between the two of them, I think Matt Damon would be the better choice.
And there is actually a bit of Jason Bourne energy to this version of Bruce Wayne. I like Damon. I think that he's grown a lot as an actor. I think that when we look at the script that we read, this is such a fundamentally physical characterization. When I say that, I mean that this is a role that has to have 90% of its power carried in body language and eyes.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Matt Damon's your body language and eyes guy. A person who would definitely be in the room, so to speak, at the time, is Christian Bale.
I really liked Christian Bale's Batman.
I was going to say, yeah, I think that we definitely can say that he can play Batman and he can play Bruce Wayne.
But in a lot of ways, I like Christian Bale a little bit better for Harvey Dent.
I think there's reasons why I agree with that. I also just wonder, there's already a connecting thread between the way that Christian Bale did Bruce Wayne and the way that Christian Bale does like Patrick Bateman in American Psycho.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I think that given the way that he likes to mix things up, I actually think that the Travis Bickle Batman might not feel like enough of a stretch after he comes off of American Psycho.
But the thing about Christian Bale, and the reason why I like him for Harvey Dent, is Christian Bale is an actor that goes all in on inhabiting the roles he portrays.
He does.
Right?
He does.
Daniel Day-Lewis is another example of that. Jennifer Lawrence. And I think he would be able to bring that into Harvey Dent, especially if later on in this sort of in the Aronofsky verse,
he gets to go Two-Face.
He does Two-Face, yeah. All right, so let's talk more about Bruce. So we've talked about Joaquin, Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Freddie Prinze Jr., Christian Bale. Leonardo DiCaprio would probably be on this list.
I agree.
He's probably busy doing a Scorsese movie, though.
Whatever film Scorsese does next,
He's probably doing House of Gucci.
Whether it's Howard Hughes or the Gucci's, it's got Leonardo DiCaprio in it, and that's what he's choosing. Another guy that would be in the mix has some history with Nolan, has definitely a star, which is on the rise at this point, would be Guy Pearce. I think he might be an interesting choice.
I like Guy Pearce for this.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, like, I think Guy Pearce is a great actor, but this was a period of time where he made some bad choices.
I don't know, man. I do really like Guy Pearce in this. The one concern that I have is I think he might already be aged out. I think you want somebody with a little bit of angry baby energy. That's one of the reasons, actually, I think DiCaprio would have been interesting here, because I think back to, like, the DiCaprio of, like, the Basketball Diaries is kind of what we're talking about here, and some of that energy would have been good. But there's a couple other people that I think that could absolutely have brought that at this time. First one is someone who ends up becoming quite entwined with the Batman franchise, Heath Ledger. You know, anyone who knows Heath Ledger's careers knows that he can definitely play action lead. You know, like
sure.
you know, he's not that far off of A Knight's Tale at this point. I think he could play a lot with the eyes. I think that he's got the brooding baby look that would work really well for our Travis Bickle Bruce Wayne. The other person, and it's funny, we keep on butting up against other superhero franchises with our casting choices here, you gotta at least think about Colin Farrell.
Yeah.
Knowing what I know about Aronofsky, I'm interested in Farrell. I'm gonna put some energy behind backing Farrell. The downside of Farrell at this point in his career, you know how I'm not sure would back Farrell? Lloyd's of London.
Yeah.
Farrell was getting into a lot of trouble at this point. Not legal trouble, but he was
yeah.
He was notoriously rough around the edges. Had some problems showing up on time on set. Had some problems waking up in the wrong bed
with the wrong person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that the story is when he made Miami Vice, which was 2004. They shot Miami Vice, so a little bit later than this. I think was a great movie and a great performance on his part. But he has no recollection of actually making that movie. And after it was done, that's when he checked into rehab.
Yeah, so right now we're talking about 2002 Colin Farrell,
Yeah.
and I just think that...
So he's square, in his Charles Bukowski phase right now.
Yeah, so I just think it's rough imagining him going the distance and actually getting to camera on this.
I think I would throw Jared Leto into the mix here. Aronofsky and him had already worked together in Requiem for a Dream. He definitely can play the type of broken.
He can. And I gotta be honest, when you first mentioned Leto, I don't like him. Nothing that he's done behind the scenes over the past decade have made me like him more. Having said that, the more that I think about it, the more that I agree, this is before a lot of his more problematic elements had become public.
Roll back the clock to 2000.
I know. This is before a lot of his more problematic elements have become public. We know that he's willing to commit to a role in a very Christian Bale-esque way, gain or lose weight. I can absolutely imagine him bulking up to a real meaty 225, 230 for this role. And he's got the right eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some cases when you and I have these conversations where one of us will say a person and we're both like, oh yeah, it's him. And I'm not quite there, but it probably happened. So yeah, I'll give you Jared Leto as our Aronofsky-verse Batman.
All right, so let's talk about Gordon.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people we've already talked about, and I don't think we need to mention any of them again.
But there's a couple,
with the exception of Joaquin Phoenix. We should mention Joaquin Phoenix
as Gordon.
Yeah.
Okay, I could see it. There's some people I like better.
I could absolutely imagine Joaquin Phoenix threatening to eat a bullet the first time you meet him, in his bathroom flat in Gotham City.
So there's a couple of people I like for Gordon.
Okay.
As well. Viggo Mortensen.
Mortensen's interesting. Yeah, Mortensen brings a lot of gravitas.
He could bring the tortured gravitas.
He could also bring, there's a scene near the end of the script. He grabs, he holds his child in his arms, and I think that Viggo could also bring that side of it.
I also kind of like Michael Rooker.
Rooker is interesting. I mean, it's been so long since Rooker played a likable character. James Gunn loves to use him, but James Gunn kind of loves to use him as... Well, James Gunn loves Rooker going Rooker. I think the closest that Rooker's played...
The Replacement Killer.
I know you like Rooker, but let me ask you a question. Can he play across from Jared Leto?
See, I like Viggo Mortensen.
I do too. I do too. It's so funny to my mind. This becomes who's the It's not a question about whether or not his co-star throws a punch. It's a question which co-star throws a punch and Jared Leto comes back to the table 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
And I think that Morgansen's at the top of that list.
All right, so let's talk about Harvey Dent.
Yeah. I mean, again, a lot of the same names. I think the only two people that we added of interest to this list are Robert Downey Jr. and Hugh Jackman.
So Robert Downey Jr. during this period in time is uninsurable. But I'll tell you who I do like outside of Christian Bale is Hugh Jackman.
I think that Hugh Jackman brings some good energy to it, especially given his musical theater background and You know, I mean, he's played Wolverine at this point, but I would love to see Hugh Jackman, like, go to town chewing the scenery as Two-Face.
Well, that's the thing. Like, so Hugh Jackman has those two sides of him. That, like, nice, friendly, positive Australian, and then Wolverine.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we know he can pull it off.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice. I mean, I the one question I have is how busy is he during this
That's
period?
true.
I mean,
That's true.
I think at this point he'd just be coming off of X2 or in production on X2.
Yeah.
I'm actually gonna vote Christian Bale. I think that he's in a place in his career where he'd probably take it. I think he's the kind of guy that, like, the possibility of working with Aronofsky, it sounds really good to him. I think that, you know, as we know, he's not against getting involved with the franchise. You know, he's one of those guys that's done both Marvel and DC at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we slot in Christian Bale as Harvey Dent. I like that.
Okay.
All right, next on our list was Little Al. We had a relatively short list for Little Al. You know, Ving Rhames is absolutely in a point in his career at this point where he'd be Big Al. I don't know how much I believe Ving Rhames would bring the daddy energy that you want.
No.
Like, Big Al needs to be, like, rough and tough, but, like, since he doesn't express a lot of it in dialogue, you would have to see the love that he feels for Bruce in his eyes.
So I'll tell you who I like for this.
All right.
Even though he's not as big a guy as a Ving Rhames, is Lenny James.
I like that. You know, Michael Clark Duncan was another person we talked about.
Michael Clark Duncan obviously has the size.
But I feel like he's almost like the flip side of Ving Rhames. I think that, like, the times that he plays someone rough and tumble, I never quite buy it. You know, a good actor, but, like, yeah, but Lenny James is a cool one. I got no issue with Lenny James. I think that Lenny James could just bring the fire for Big Al.
I mean, obviously, in this discussion, Samuel L. Jackson would come up.
He would absolutely be in the mix. Speaking of people that would punch Jared Leto a lot.
Yeah. Lawrence Fishburne would probably come up. But again, I think he'd be too busy.
I agree.
There's one other person that might come up who I like, but not as much as Lenny James, is Michael Jai White. And maybe it's just because I'm a big Michael Jai White fan.
I get all the reasons I like Michael Jai White. Michael Jai White is not that far out after his, like, less than star-making turn in Spawn, but still a few years out from his incredibly awesome star-making turn as Black Knight.
So, Lenny James.
Lenny James. Let's settle on Lenny James so I can use him as a dark horse for our next one.
Okay.
Which is the character of Chi-Chi.
For background, Selena's pimp is Chi-Chi, and he's a scumbag pimp.
Michael J. White has got to at least be in the mix for Chi-Chi. It is impossible for me to separate Michael J. White as a potential Chi-Chi from Black Dynamite, and that's somewhat problematic because they are very different, actually.
So, I'm a little bit conflicted here, and I'll tell you why. On the one hand, you're right. On the other hand, it's a little too Hollywood stereotypy for me.
It is. I get that. And I think if you cast Michael J. White, I think that Chi-Chi it becomes a little different than he is on the page.
So the other one that I like is Benicio del Toro. Yeah.
So that was the one that you and I originally talked about. After my dark horse, it is still probably the right way to go, unless we decide that Chi-Chi is going to run a home for sex workers and orphans, in which case Michael J. White would be the only choice. But yeah, I think Benicio del Toro is the way to go for Chi-Chi. So now we have Selena Kyle. And, you know, I think Selena's interesting, and there's a number of people that we threw out here. There's a couple that I do particularly like, but why don't you start?
I like Thandie Newton.
Really?
Yeah.
Because that's what I like too. I was totally expecting you to fight for somebody else. All right, let me just go down the list really quick. For Catwoman, we had Rosie Perez, Angela Bassett, who would have been awesome.
Yes, no question.
Halle Berry, who would have been better than she was in Catwoman.
She would have been good at Catwoman.
She would have been really good Catwoman here.
She wasn't the problem. She wasn't the problem.
Nia Long, who also would have been good. Jennifer Lopez, who would have been Jennifer Lopez. Beyonce, because we're, like, actually around the time when she's, like, doing some acting. I feel like Beyonce as Selena Kyle would have brought a little bit of Whitney Houston and the Bodyguard energy.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't mean that entirely as a diss, to be clear, but, like, she would have been in the mix. She would have been in the room. I just don't think you go with Beyonce. I then think we get down to, like, the couple of people that I really like on this list. So you mentioned Thandie Newton, who I was assuming was who I was going to go to bat for, because I was assuming you would go to bat for the other top contender on this list, which is Rosario Dawson.
So Rosario Dawson would be good, but Thandie Newton she would have been the third heat on this movie.
Rewatching Guy Ritchie's Rock and Rolla, and I just like Sandy Newton doing that, but a more physicalized version. I actually think she could be great.
So you got to remember, like,
in this role.
When you read the script, there's a lot of back and forth between Selena and Bruce.
Yeah. And Selena does most of the heavy lifting dialogue-wise.
Yeah. So here's what I'll say. Jared Leto and Thandie Newton, like, that combination with that banter.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it could work really well. I mean, I think Rosario Dawson would also be really good. The reason that this conversation played out very differently in my head when you went for Rosario Dawson, I went for Thandie Newton, is because I was going to counter with saying that, like, Rosario Dawson's too fresh off of another Frank Miller property,
Sin
City.
Yeah.
But this wasn't that conversation, so I'm just going to go ahead and say, yep, it's Thandie Newton. So the next two characters are Loeb and the Mayor, both of which are more or less creations for Batman Year One, but have shown up since then in other modern Batman properties. Loeb and the Mayor are both, don't think of them as police commissioners or mayors. Think of them as, like, a mafia captain and a mafia, like, Capito Tutti-Capi, because that's certainly the way Miller wrote them. So for Loeb, yeah, I think we have, like, an interesting set of choices here. So starting out with Mel Gibson would be in the mix. I gave you Leto.
I know.
When we talk about problematic actors, and obviously the difference between Leto as a problematic actor and Mel Gibson as a problematic actor is the difference between, like, shooting a bullet and throwing it. Gibson's on an entirely another level, but this is 2002.
But
he's not canceled yet.
Yeah. This is before Mel Gibson is dead to me. So he'd be on the list.
Yeah, I think you're dead to him too, but yeah.
I know I am. That's the problem.
So we both agree, like, he'd be discussed. He's bringing star power to the mix. I don't know if Loeb is a big enough character for him, because he's not in his, like, I'm going to work my way up the character actor chain at this point the way he is right now. That is tragically going better than I think it should. So I just think he's too big, the role's too small, which is good, because even forgetting about the fact that a lot of, like, what Mel Gibson says these days sounded better than the original German, I just don't think it's the right mix. I think another person that I really like, but isn't necessarily my top choice, is Gabriel Byrne. And of course, like, here, I'm really thinking about, like, the Miller's Crossing.
Yeah, I know, you're thinking about Miller's Crossing. Yeah. Miller's Crossing, Usual Suspects.
Yep.
Era, Gabriel Byrne. While those are both awesome roles, especially Miller's Crossing, because it happens to be my favorite Coen Brothers movie for all kinds of reasons. I think we can do better.
Well, what about, like, another person that we had in this list that I like a lot? He'd bring less brooding and more, like, annoying charisma, would be Stanley Tucci.
So I like Stanley Tucci. Yeah. Like, I think about, like, Lucky Number 11 era Stanley Tucci, which is a little bit later, but I think that would be good. I think I can do one better. Dennis Farina.
I have a huge soft spot for Dennis Farina. I thought this might be coming. I'm not going to argue it at all. You can have your Miami Vice, which is good, but I'll take my Crime Story any day, you know, and I'll take Farina's like Michael Mann film roles any day. Like, I love the guy, and I think that he would just bring. I just think he would bring just the right.
Okay, so
energy.
I'm gonna close the deal
on
Dennis Farina.
All right.
When I tell you who I want to be the mayor. And when
you think about we don't have a list here, do we?
And when you think about the dialogue, you're going to ask yourself, why hasn't this happened in a movie already? So Dennis Farina is Loeb, and for the mayor, John Polito. Going back to Miller's Crossing.
Going back to Miller's Crossing, he's the high hat guy.
So
the way the mayor's written in this film, he could absolutely give the ethics speech, the Miller's Crossing ethics speech.
So just for background, the mayor is kind of subservient to Commissioner Loeb.
Yeah,
Loeb is running the show. He's the big villain. And the big scene between the mayor and Loeb is when the mayor comes in and he's really worried about all the stuff that's going on and the Batman, and that they're all going to get exposed, and it's going to be bad. And Loeb, who should be played by Dennis Farina, basically tells him, go get your fucking shine box and get out of the way, and I'll take care of it.
No notes, but you got me on this one. I think that if we were keeping score, you won the casting. The casting game this time around. But the combination of John Polito.
It's not a contest.
Just like having a couple of really good John Polito, Dennis Farina scenes alone is worth it. I don't love the fact that at one point Jared Leto beats the crap out of Dennis Farina, but like they would both bring the right energy to those sequences.
But it would work.
It would. It absolutely would work.
Especially if you think like circa 2001, it would work.
So, I mean, I think that we're talking about an interesting world where Aronofsky makes at least a couple of good Batman films.
We get Paul Dini's Batman Beyond.
As opposed to the Batman Beyond that we lost just a couple of years ago, which I feel personally robbed by because it was one of several examples where Michael Keaton's elder statesman Batman didn't get to be what he should have been. But let's just stick with the fact that I think that there's a really good chance that you have Clint Eastwood as old Bruce Wayne.
As old Bruce Wayne in a Batman Beyond.
Yeah.
Like a Paul Dini Batman Beyond. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
And I'll just throw it out there, since this is probably not an episode we ever do. I could absolutely imagine like Ryan Gosling as
back then. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that.
So we're talking about like a mature looking teen. Basically, is who Terry McGinnis should be in Batman Beyond. So you got like a Ryan Gosling as a young Terry McGinnis, a Clint Eastwood as a particularly old and crotchety Bruce Wayne. Yeah, I think that movie does well. And and I think that. Again, we're talking about by the mid-2000s, Warner Brothers is like, this like one auteur-driven film for the grown-ups and one fourth quadrant movie for the whole family. It's not a bad 1-2 punch to keep on hitting. Batman Beyond we just discussed. There were other films that were kind of in the mix at that period that never ended up happening. On the adult side, Guillermo del Toro was really interested in doing his Justice
League Dark. Yeah.
That could have been awesome. I don't think it's hard to imagine, like, then on the family side, a version of the Batgirl film that got shelved a couple of years ago that also, again, had Michael, my Michael. Now we're starting to get to a little bit more of a stretch. But given the fact they've continued to work together and given the fact that it was very much in the mix for a long time, that instead of the Catwoman that we did get, we instead get Tim Burton and Michelle Pfeiffer getting to do their Catwoman.
Could see that.
That was the original idea. Maybe a Green Lantern that doesn't suck.
Or we might see Thandie Newton standalone Catwoman.
That's true. Then now we do the Aronofsky verse, but sure. I mean, Thandie Newton would be great as Catwoman. What about like a family Green Lantern film, which, instead of what they ended up doing with Ryan Reynolds, like they get some great actor to really chew the scenery as the villain, which means you get more of an unknown for Green Lantern himself. For those of you who don't know, Green Lantern is like one of those superheroes that's actually a title, not a person. And in the DC continuity, there have been a number of Green Lanterns, many of them actually do the job at the same time. Ryan Reynolds played Hal Jordan, who's one incarnation. There's another one that I actually like a lot better named Guy Gardner.
See,
he could also be Jon Stewart.
During that period of time as Jon Stewart.
And not the Daily Show Jon Stewart. Now we're talking about a very different Jon Stewart.
Which, for the kids of that time, are really familiar with from the animated series.
That's right, yeah.
Right?
And come on, Michael J. White would bring some great energy to that Green Lantern.
I could get behind that.
Maybe he could give a speech about not selling
drugs in the neighborhood. And then maybe we see the George Miller Justice League Mortal. Again, podcast for another
one we
day.
might actually do. So I don't want to go too deep into George Miller's Justice League, but spoiler alert, that's a film that almost happened that I probably want to talk about at some point.
Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed our bonus episode of Darren Aronofsky's Batman. Let us know if you'd like more bonus episodes like this or you'd like us to throw it all in one long episode.